yeah, it's really cool seeing a lot of the stuff described in the first book just come to life in the graphic novel. Hi guys, Gidru64 here, and today we're going to be talking about Animorphs. That's right, a graphic novel of Animorphs just came out. Yes, something new from Animorphs just came out. We're going to talk about that today, so we're going to jump right into it. So I just want to start by saying I am a huge Animorphs fan. I grew up with Animorphs. Back in the 90s, the two main books were Goosebumps and Animorphs. Those seem to be the two main series. Scholastic Book Fair would come to town, and those were the two books everybody talked about. Harry Potter came out, I think, later in the 90s, and it really overshadowed both of those books and kind of killed those franchises, it seemed. Now, there's been a resurgence of Goosebumps and apparently Animorphs, because something new from Animorphs came out, and I pre-ordered this ahead of time. I mean, I pretty much will buy anything Animorphs. It's not like there's a whole lot coming out. I do own all of the Animorphs books that I got them as they came out. I actually started out of order. I read book number 4 first, and then I read book number 3. And then it was kind of out of order until I caught up to what was currently out, which was to issue 10. So they were kind of out of order, but I got the gist of it, and man, I loved Animorphs. Animorphs is very complicated. From the outset, it's kind of a meme. Most people know it from the memes because the covers are kind of goofy, but Animorphs is really deep. It's really deep. I could do multiple videos talking about it, and I kind of want to do one at least talking about the morality of those books. And there's lots of moral ambiguity. It's extremely gory. Like, I don't think this book would exist today, but anyway, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent talking about Animorphs. Again, I could literally do a video talking about Animorphs easily, probably a couple videos, but I want to go ahead and get into the review for the graphic novel. The graphic novel is an adaptation of the first book. I pre-ordered it before I really knew that. So once I found that out, which was just before I got the book, I was kind of hesitant. I was like, I don't know how that's going to work out. And the reason why is the first book explains a lot. I mean, it's super exposition heavy. So I was kind of worried. Comic books in particular, it's a visual medium. It's about doing dynamic splash pages, and it's not so much about heavy dialogue. If you get run-on pages with heavy dialogue and exposition in a visual medium, it can drag it out, and it kind of does in this. But it actually turned out pretty well, I think. So the first thing I really want to talk about is the artist, who is Chris Grine. I don't know anything about this artist. I've never seen anything that he's done. I do think his art is pretty good. It's not exactly the style I would go with, and what I mean by that is the way he draws humans is fairly cartoony. The way he draws animals is great, but the way he draws people, humans, is cartoony, which isn't inherently bad, but it's not the style I would have gone with, but I still liked it. The main problem I had with it was that he draws the human characters very similar. Like, all of humans look pretty similar. Specifically the main characters, the 5 human kids, look kind of similar, specifically Tobias and Rachel. So if you look at this panel right here, and I'll take a picture of this so you guys can see it better, but in this panel up here you have Tobias, and then this person right down here is Rachel, and they look extremely similar, very side by side. Let me put these the only difference you can really see from these two characters is earrings and their clothes changed. But in the face, they look fairly similar. Now, I never liked Tobias with blonde hair. Now, in the books, he was always described with having dirty blonde hair, but the model they had in the books was, he had brown hair. He had dark, long brown hair. So whenever they did finally switch the model to a kid with blonde hair, it was much later in the book. So I had always visually looked at him as how his model was on the cover of the book, which was opposite to the way he's described. But because of that, I always think of Tobias as having like dark, long hair, kind of emo-ish. And how he's portrayed in this, I don't really like the way he's drawn. Like when I look at him, I don't see Tobias. Maybe that's just me. But because the animals look so good, it just makes the human characters look so different. And I just think that the styles could be a little bit more in sync. That's one of my main criticisms. I mean, look at the gorilla. So the way that he draws the gorilla is awesome. The way that he draws the eyes when they're being acquired to show that they're in a trance is really cool. You can clearly tell this guy had an idea. You can tell that he read Animorphs, because when you read a book, people are going to interpret things that they read in different ways. But I really like his interpretation of the way the trance works, how everything looks. A lot of this stuff looks kind of how I would imagine when they go to the gardens, which is basically, I always thought of like Busch Gardens or like a Six Flags from what they describe, like a cross between Busch Gardens and a Six Flags, which is kind of just Busch Gardens, isn't it? But the way he draws that, the way he draws the underground yurk pools, and again, just the aliens. I think the way that he draws the aliens is really cool. So I've always seen pictures of Hork-Bajir and Toxin from the books. You see, there's one cover where Tobias turns into a Toxin. So that's really, I think, the best look you get at a Toxin up till that point, and they look quite a bit different than what I originally had thought. The only qualm I have with the way he draws Toxin in this is that I think they're a little bit too big. I'm misremembering it, but I just remember them being quite a bit smaller than how they appear in this. Because how they appear in this is they're like bigger than Hork-Bajir, and I just don't remember that from the book. But then again, I haven't read the book in forever, so who knows? Maybe he's got it right. I love how he draws the Hork-Bajir. They're very similar to how I think the Hork-Bajir should look. I would probably give them a little bit bigger arms, longer arms. They kind of look a little bit like T-Rexes. The Toxin, I think he nails the way Toxin looks. Again, just the size. Yeah, it's really cool seeing a lot of the stuff described in the first book just come to life in the graphic novel. This actually feels like quality when I was reading it. This doesn't feel like some slapped together thing. And apparently Chris Grine is a fan of Animorphs. And you can tell that when you're reading this. Like when you're reading this is a very good adaptation of the first book. There's dialogue directly out of the book. It's very honest to it. It obviously takes place in the 90s, which is what I've said in a previous video when I talked about adapting Animorphs for a Netflix series. You have to keep it in the 90s. And the reason why you can tell that it's in the 90s is a couple little discrete things. Like they don't have cell phones, so they don't outright tell you that it's in the 90s, but you can kind of imply that's probably the case. Now, most people who are going to buy Animorphs, the graphic novel, are going to buy it specifically because they were familiar with Animorphs. So your target demographic, I think, for the graphic novel is probably, late 20s somethings, early 30 somethings, I guess. Kids who grew up reading Animorphs, because it's not that well-known property to younger kids. Now, they've tried to get it in that pocket and get it into current kids and get them interested in it, and it hasn't really worked out all that well. But that doesn't mean they should stop trying. I do think there's a lot of really cool stuff in Animorphs. One thing that the artist does capture very well is the way that he draws the morphing. The way he draws the morphing is very honest to the book. It's very creepy looking. It just looks messed up and deformed. There's the crunching noises. Like I said, my favorite thing about this is how much you can tell the person making it knows and loves Animorphs. That means a lot, okay? That means a lot. So despite the fact that the cartoony way that the characters are drawn isn't necessarily my favorite style, I honestly didn't care. Initially I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, but the more I read it, the more I just kind of got into Animorphs again. Like it took me back to when I was a kid and reading Animorphs. I do think that it was kind of an odd choice to adapt the first book. I get why, because people who don't know Animorphs will know Animorphs by the graphic novel. It'll explain kind of the rules and the setting and everything. But again, I feel like most people who buy this already know what Animorphs is, so it might have been a better choice to just do a new novel that takes place somewhere in between the books. A whole new story. I think that would be a little bit more interesting, and it would get rid of a lot of the exposition heavy stuff, or even adapt one of the other later books that, again, there's more stuff that goes on in the books. And the first book is very exposition heavy. The first two books are kind of slow, in my opinion. As the books go on, they become more self-contained. You kind of get some really crazy stories. For anybody who's read Animorphs, you know what I'm talking about. There's some crazy stories. But one thing Animorphs does really good is world building also. So again, I could talk about Animorphs all day. But after I got to the end of this actually has a preview for the next one, which I wasn't expecting. There's a preview for book 2 in here, and I was really surprised by that. There's a whole preview of it looks like all the Animorphs. I don't want to show it in case you haven't read it, but all the Animorphs in some bird forms, and so yeah, that's straight out of book number 2. I am looking forward to book number 2. I don't know if it's gonna be made. Maybe it's dependent on how much this sells. Maybe it's going to come out regardless. I don't know. I think what Scholastic is trying to do with this series is a good thing, bringing it back. I normally am opposed to rebooting things or any of this stuff, but this is not a reboot. Like, this is an honest adaptation of what Animorphs was. It's an honest adaptation of the book. There's nothing forced in here. There's nothing added in here. It's just the book. It's the first book in a graphic novel form. And that's why I love it so much. In an age where there's just everything is just rebooted, and when it's rebooted, it's changed in all the worst ways. It becomes more negative, more nihilistic. Characters get switched around for the sake of switching around the characters and changing them up for no really good reason, changing the story up for no good reason, and it's always worse than what they originally was done, because what originally was original. That's the whole point. So when you do a reboot, it needs to, if you're going to do it, it needs to be honest to what came before, or it needs to be better than what came before. And I have yet in current year, like the last 5 years, I don't think I've seen a single reboot be better than the original. And in that case, what's the point of it? So for me, I think the Animorphs graphic novel is a recommend for sure. If you are an Animorphs fan, it is on Amazon. I think it's $24.99 right now. It may be marked down later. I don't know. I do recommend getting it if you're an Animorphs fan, because anything new coming out from Animorphs, as Animorphs fans, I wish we would support it. I want to see Animorphs have a resurgence in a good way. Like, I want to see it come back in a good way. I will say that the book could use some more splash pages, and by splash pages I mean more dynamic page layouts. I've talked about this in my one other review I did, which was of Three Jokers not that long ago. In comics and graphic novels, having good dynamic page layouts really add a lot to the character of the story. You know, it's basically like having different camera angles when you're filming a movie or a TV show. The way you do a comic is by having different panel layouts, is like having a camera. I mean, the same thing like when you're drawing perspective. So I think that this does better than the Three Jokers as far as like having some life to the page layouts, but I think it could use a little bit more. So that's kind of my two really, I guess, constructive criticisms about this, is that the page layouts could use a little bit of work, and not change the style of the humans, because that's clearly the artist's style, but try and make the characters look a little bit different. Like, just make them look a little bit different. Rachel in particular, she's described in the book as being an attractive girl, and I mean, you can't tell that from this, and So I think that's important. It's important to her character. Just like Tobias, the way he acts in this has a little bit different feel than what I think about Tobias, and also what he looks like. Again, I know he's got blonde hair, but he just doesn't look like Tobias to me. So those two particular characters, I would say, and Cassie, I would maybe tweak her look a little bit. And I don't think she wears overalls too much in the book. So that's one thing I obviously associate a lot with that character. This is one panel I really did want to show. I usually don't like to show panels unless it's something specific I'm talking about. But this specific panel really got me when I was reading it. There's just actual emotion here. Just the way he draws this. For those familiar with Animorphs, this is Tom, who is Jake's brother in the books, and he is being controlled by an alien. And you can tell in this picture, there's just emotion there. This is the most emotional panel in the entire book. It's very simple but effective in showing just the despair there that of being trapped in your own body. And I think this just captured it really well, and I just had to show it. So that is Animorphs, the graphic novel. I'd like to do some more. I might be doing some more Animorphs videos if you guys are interested. I don't know how many people are even interested in Animorphs anymore. There might be me and like 5 other people. But Animorphs is cool. And I wish more people would get into it. If you go back and read the books as an adult, they're super short reads. I mean, they're like 150 pages and giant font. I'm talking about giant font. You can read through a whole book in one day easy. And I think they're actually adding some of the books to Audible too. So, I mean, if you go back and read it, yeah, there are some aspects of it that you're like, yeah, this is clearly, for young adults. But there's some aspects of it, especially later on, when you're like, this is heavy stuff. There's some heavy stuff in Animorphs. So again, recommend picking this up if you're an Animorphs fan. If you're not an Animorphs fan and any of the stuff I said about Animorphs sounds interesting, this is probably a good place to start, because it does, like I said, it's exposition heavy, explains the setting, the world, and the moral dilemmas to come. So yeah, recommend. It's a recommend. Have you guys checked out the Animorphs graphic novel? Do you remember Animorphs, the reading the books? Or do you remember the series even existed? Or are you one of those people who only knows it from the memes? You're probably in one of those groups anyway. But I just want to thank you all for joining me. Please comment and let me know, because I am curious about your thoughts about Animorphs. But I just want to thank my subscribers, because you guys are awesome. Thank everyone for joining me today. And if you like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, or don't. I'm not a beggar. I'm Geechu64, and I'll always tell you the truth.